We all keep hearing that exam technique is very important for ACCA professional exams. But what exactly is exam technique and how do you master it? If you want to learn that, keep on watching because that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. Hello everyone, this is Zeynep. I'm going to share some exam technique tips with you today. This is going to be a little bit SBL, Strategic Business Leader focused, but most of what I mentioned in this video also will apply to other professional exams. So what is exam technique? In the most basic terms, exam technique is how you answer an exam. So when it comes to professional exams, exam technique is really made of two big components. One is good planning and the other one is good writing. So let's get started with the first tip. To master the exam technique, you have to do question practice. And especially past exam questions and mock exams are very important to learn exam technique. It is very hard to learn exam technique unless you practice it, because what you expect is that it becomes a second nature, it becomes very naturally to you, so that when you enter the exam hall, you don't have to think twice about how you are going to answer a question. The second tip is getting to know the exam. You should be very familiar with the exam, not just how the questions are going to appear, but also what a good answer is, and the marking scheme should be very familiar to you. And the best way to achieve this is watching the past exam debriefs, watching the Prepare to Pass webinars, because most of the people who teach those webinars tend to talk about exam technique there, and they are breaking down the marking scheme. Also reading the Mind of an SPL, SPR, AAA, etc. marker articles. I'm going to link all of the ACCA free resources below. The main point here is to make most of them, to understand what you need to write and how you need to write for a mark. Once you know what you need to do to get a mark, it becomes much easier to plan an answer. It also makes it very easy to plan when you know what a good answer is. So again, go to ACCA free resources, use them, read the examiner reports. If you have time, please do read them. For now, I'm going to make a short summary of what a good answer is for most professional exams, and especially for the strategic business leader. A good answer is written in clear, concise, and short sentences. It is to the point, it doesn't make irrelevant points, and directly addresses the requirement. You also don't want to repeat your points because it's not going to bring any marks and it's not necessary, so you're basically losing time there by repeating a point. Another thing is to structure your exams. For structure, you need to use paragraphs, headings, and subheadings. Also, don't forget there are specific answer formats in the papers. So sometimes you need to write a memo, sometimes you need to answer an email, sometimes you need to prepare a report or presentation slides. So you should be familiar with those formats. Another thing is that you should start your answers with an introduction and you should have a conclusion. And by an introduction and a conclusion, I mean mostly 1 or 2 sentences, maybe a little longer for the conclusion, but nothing too long, nothing that's going to cost you time. Another thing to keep in mind is that you should prioritize your answer. How do you prioritize your answer? You make the most important points first, and then you move on to the less important points. The thing here is that try to give your answer a logical flow. When you start from point A and you're going to the point Z, your answer should follow some specific steps, and the best way to, of course, learn that style of writing is question practice. Third tip is thinking of the exam in terms of people. And what I mean by people is, first, you. Pay attention to which role you are assuming in the exam and try to think a person in that specific role, maybe a non-executive director or a business analyst, in real life, and imagine yourself writing an answer in that professional position in the real workforce. Number 2 is thinking of the recipient. So who are you writing to? Are you writing to senior management or are you writing to your team? Maybe you are writing to a junior. You wouldn't use the same tone to all of these people in real life, so don't use the same tone for a senior management member and a junior team member in the exam. Number 3, think of the examiner. What is the examiner expecting from you? So read the requirements carefully and more than once. Pay attention to the verbs, break them down, and again, prioritize. So the fourth person to think of is the marker. Now, when I say think of the marker, remember that a real person is going to read that paper and try to make sense of what you write. So try to use decent handwriting. Again, structure your answer as much as you can. Use headings and subheadings, use paragraph, make the marker's job easier. Because if the marker can't understand what you wrote, they can't give you marks. By that, I don't mean having the perfect English, because ACCA makes it clear that they're not making you lose marks for bad grammar or spelling mistakes. But what I mention is being clear so that the marker understands your points so that they can mark them. And lastly, this is not always going to be a person, but remember the stakeholders. In the scenario, who is affected by the actions that the company or the organization is taking? Who are the stakeholders in that scenario? Try to remember that, because you're going to probably need to integrate that to some of your answers. Tip number 4 is using your planning time well. So what I mean by planning time is, in all of the professional exams, you're advised to read and plan before you start writing. This is 40 to 60 minutes for the strategic business leader. So this is a good chunk of time. Having a good plan is going to help you write better in a shorter time. So you should understand what a plan means for you. For some people, this is writing down most of the details. For some people, it's just a rough plan. And for some people, like me, it's full brain dump on the margins of the page, whatever comes to your mind when you're reading. The minimum you want to do is that you should try to understand the priorities of the case. Read the exhibits, and when reading the exhibits, try to pay attention to what the examiner is actually emphasizing. Like, are they mentioning a point in one sentence or in a full paragraph? So if they're mentioning something during a full paragraph, they're probably prioritizing it, and you should probably prioritize it too. And at that point also, please pay attention to what your professional role is, that's assumed in the requirements, what you are expected to do, which means, again, pay attention to the question verb, and pay attention to your recipient. Who are you writing that answer to? Of course, at that point, also consider the answer format. Is it a memo? Is it a report? Is it slides? So after that, after prioritizing and getting the basics down, you should have a rough understanding of how you are going to write the answer. So if you practice this during your question practice, if you try to plan your answers each time you attempt a question, you are going to find out which way of planning works for you, and you are going to master it, so you don't have to think about it twice when you enter the exam. Time management. This is going to be the 5th tip. So I'm going to start with some basics that's commonly applied among students, that's advised by ACCA. So usually you are advised to use a planning time. For example, in the case of SPL, as we mentioned before, you are expected to use 40 to 60 minutes for reading and planning. So assume you use 60 minutes for planning. Then you have 180 minutes, 3 hours to write. The first thing you need to keep in mind for time management is that you are not expected to write anything extra for the professional marks. The professional skills should be integrated in the answer that you write to get technical marks. One step to ensure that is structuring your answers using headings, subheadings, and paragraphs. And another thing that you can do is completing the ethics and professional skills module before the exam. Now, on the ACCA website, there are short videos for each of the professional skills that you are expected to demonstrate in the SPL exam, and I'm going to link all of those below in the description box. But let's talk about the actual writing of the exam and how we are going to manage the time there. Think that you use an hour to read and plan the strategic business leader exam. Now, after you use that hour, you're left with 3 hours. So you have 180 minutes and 80 technical marks to write for, which means that you have 2.25 minutes per mark. So in the case of a 25 mark question, that leaves us with roughly 56 minutes. Now, we have already planned our answers in our reading and planning time, so we have 56 minutes to write. Well, if you can use all of that time productively, it's good. But if you're like me, usually around 40-45 minutes into the question, I'm done. I'm done for that time. I mean, my answer is not complete. I'm sure I will go back and want to add some things to it, but at that point, nothing else comes to my mind. So what I do is that during the whole exam, after every paragraph, I leave generous spaces. I try to do 2 or 3 lines at least. So it's 2 or 3 lines between each paragraph and each requirement. I mean, the exam booklet is long enough, so I can do that. And I can always remember something at a later point in the exam that I want to add to a specific question. Why hurt the flow of the question? I've already tried to prioritize that question. I already gave it a logical flow. Why disrupt the flow, right? What I do is that by leaving the spaces, I make sure that I can add any point to anywhere in the question, so it still has a logical flow, even though I go back to it 2 hours later and add another point. So I suggest you do the same, because 4 hours is a long time and you can always come up with new ideas and new points. You want to add that to your questions to get marks, so leave space between each paragraph. Another thing with time management is that, of course, you should practice time management when you are doing the question practice, but how? One thing that didn't work for me is trying to put a time limit from the beginning of the question practice, because at that point I was very slow. A 30-minute question was taking like an hour for me and it didn't work. So what I tried to do instead is that I started question practice with no time limit, but I was still measuring the time I used for each question. Say that I was using 60 minutes for a 30-minute question. I was noting it down, and the next day I was aiming for 55 minutes for a 30-minute question. So I was trying to shorten that time and reach to the time limit that was given in the practice kit in the question, but I didn't push myself to write in 30 minutes from the start, because it didn't work. So again, the point with the question practice is not getting everything right at the beginning. The point is that you need to improve, and the best way to do is the question practice. So it's about improving as you go, getting faster, getting better in time. So don't push yourself to write in 30 minutes if you can't do it at first, but aim to reach that point when you come closer to the exams at the end of your studies. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching. If you have watched until the end, thank you so much. Subscribe if you want to see more ACCA videos, more exam planning videos. The next video I'm going to do will be a revision video, and if you don't want to miss it, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And also please like this video if you learned anything from it. See you next week.